Welcome to the Bourbon Life Podcast, your source for all things bourbon. Join your hosts, Mark and Matt, as they drink and review bourbons, share news about upcoming events, interview the who's who in the bourbon world, and, most importantly, bring you along for the fun of living the bourbon life. Now, here's your hosts, Mark and Matt.
All right, everybody, welcome back for another episode of the Bourbon Life Podcast. I'm your host, Mark, and with me, as always, is my beanie-wearing buddy, Matt. Matt, what's going on tonight? How you doing?
Hey, Mark. I am doing great. How are you doing? And how are Bourbon Lifers, everybody out there? We hope you're doing well. But Mark, how are you?
I'm doing good. You know, Matt, this is officially, even though we're recording it a little bit early, this is our official, this is the Christmas episode. This is actually going to come out on Christmas Day. So it's kind of weird to be recording that far, well, not that far in advance, but so people will be listening to this. It'll actually be Christmas Day. So, you know, if you don't have things to do on Christmas, listen to the podcast.
I hope you have a lot better stuff to do than listen to Mark and I sit here and banter back and forth.
Matt, this is the perfect thing to do on a cold, snowy Christmas day. Hopefully people will have a beautiful Christmas. So, you know, I do need to thank our sponsors because I want to get right to the show tonight. Before I do that, Matt, we started our new thing last week, the Barrel Society, our birthdays. So for this week, we actually do have two. We have Brian Wesley, his birthday's on the 24th, and Abigail Elmer, who's actually a Christmas baby. And, you know, I thought, how cool is that? But then as I was thinking about it, I'm like, man, that probably kind of sucks, you know, to have your birthday on Christmas Day at the same time. Wouldn't you think?
I don't know. My girlfriend's birthday is pretty close to Christmas. It's about like a week and a half before.
Yeah.
And so she just has like the whole Lexus December to Remember thing going on. So it makes it tough on me because I gotta double down. But
yeah, I'd say so. Well, I was thinking about that. I thought, well, maybe it's cool, but then again, maybe it's like mom and dad say, "Hey, here's your Christmas / birthday present." So maybe it doesn't work out too well for her. All right, Matt. With that said, I'm going to thank our sponsors, the Stave Restaurant out in Millville, Kentucky. Chef Jonathan Sanning providing some excellent Kentucky elevated cuisine out there. So check them out online at thestavekentucky.com. It's a cool little place to go visit as well. And with restaurants open now in Kentucky at 50% capacity, you can go out, sit down, and enjoy a meal out there. And then also 3 Chord Whiskey, our newest sponsor that we just picked up. So we're really happy to have them on board. You can check them out online as well at 3chordbourbon.com. Ari's doing some really great stuff with what they're blending together. And they just put out that new 15-year whiskey drummer. So if you can find that somewhere, Matt and I've had a sample. I've had a sample. Matt, did you get a sample? I gave you a sample of that. Have you had it?
You did give me a sample. We'll have to review it in the new year.
Yeah, it's definitely worth it. If you find that, definitely pick it up. So, all right, Matt, with that said, and the bills paid, you want to tell everybody who we have with us tonight?
Absolutely. Let's get right down to it because we are so honored and excited to have joining us on the Bourbon Life Podcast this evening for us, or whenever you're listening to it, but from Uncle Nearest Whiskey in Shelbyville, Tennessee, Fawn Weaver. Fawn, welcome to the Bourbon Life Podcast. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me, Matt.
Great. Well, yeah, welcome to the show. I'm really excited because I think we booked this probably 2 or 3 months ago, and this is one that's been on my radar. So I've been really excited to get to this point and to actually get you on the show, and appreciate you working around the schedule to get this taken care of. So before we jump into questions and stuff on what we usually like to do, because once we start talking with our guests, we usually forget to talk about what we're drinking. So, so the first thing that we have poured up tonight that we're going to be drinking is your 1884 small batch whiskey. So do you care just to take a minute or two, or as long as you'd like, and tell our listeners just a little bit about the whiskey, this particular whiskey that we're going to be drinking first?
Absolutely. Well, on the 1884, if you have the bottle in front of you, if you flip it on the back, it has the signature of Victoria Edie Butler. So she's 5th generation descendant of Nearest Green, which is obviously where the Uncle Nearest comes from. That is her specific blend, meaning
Okay.
She tastes every single barrel before it goes into that bottle. And she goes through a process and she will taste, usually she'll do 30 samples at a time, and she will toss out any of them she does not specifically want in her batch. And Victoria has a bit of a sweeter palate. She really leans toward the caramel notes, the vanilla, the oatmeal raisin, cookies, butterscotch, those types of things. And it's incredibly buttery. And that's just her personal palate. That is what she likes for mouthfeel. And so every single batch, from batch to batch, we're not trying to mirror what the last batch was. Every single time it's going to be based on how Victoria feels that day. And so far, so good, because it's going really, really well. People seem to enjoy it quite a bit. And it's just, we don't have a lot of people who will say, I prefer 56 or I prefer 1884. It will just be, I have them for different occasions.
I got you.
For different cocktails.
That makes sense. So now this is 93 proof.
Mm-hmm.
Is there an age statement? Because I didn't see it. I looked at the bottle, but I didn't read
There isn't an age statement, but it's 7 years.
It is 7 years. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I thought I had seen that, and I wasn't for sure if I had just thought that or if that's what it was. Okay, great. So 7 year and a batch of how many, when she does a batch, what kind of barrel size batch are you talking about on that?
It truly depends, because there's no way for me to say that, because there have been times where she's gone in and only included a third or 2/3 of what she tasted. So we don't have any particular minimum or maximum of, it's whatever she's tasting that day. That's what's going in.
Okay. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's so funny because I'm looking at this at the whiskey itself, and it's very light colored,
Mm-hmm.
which it kind of surprised me at first to say that it's 7 years old.
Mm-hmm.
I just, in my mind, and this is a whiskey, it's not a bourbon. So we want people to understand that we're not talking about a bourbon.
No, it is a bourbon.
It is a bourbon.
Oh yeah, it's a straight bourbon whiskey. So we Tennessee whiskey is our requirement is the same as a straight bourbon whiskey. So
right. Okay. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I should have. Yeah, you're right. I'm sorry. I should have made that distinction. I know the Tennessee whiskey, the classification is, I guess it's different, but it's basically the same liquid.
It's identical. The only difference between the two is we're very specific in the type of new charred oak barrel that we have to use. Ours has to be American. And with bourbon, you can, it just needs to be charred oak. But the other difference, obviously, is the Lincoln County process. But because it is a filtration and it removes congeners, it removes fusel oils, but it does not add anything. The legal definition is still, it's funny because when you look at even the NAFTA agreements, which is the first time Tennessee whiskey was ever mentioned off of a Jack Daniel bottle, like meaning a legal, sort of description of it, if you will, is actually in the NAFTA agreements that we had with Canada. And in that, it actually describes it as saying Tennessee whiskey, a straight bourbon whiskey. Okay. And that has truly always been the legal definition.
It's so funny you say that because I'm big on social media and I get on there quite a bit with our Instagram site and on Facebook, and there's a lot of different bourbon clubs. And that is one of the biggest points of arguments. And I don't know if people just do it for fun, just to argue, or if they really don't understand. And then somebody will throw out, well, no, because Tennessee whiskey uses the Lincoln County process and they charcoal mellow or they charcoal filter, and a bourbon can't do that. And I'm like, well, that's not true, because Old Ezra, they charcoal mellow their bourbon. So there are bourbons that do that. But anyway, it's just funny the arguments that people have regarding Tennessee whiskey.
I think for so long, and the Jack team and I, we've talked about this before. I think for so long, because of how hard Jack's nephew and great nephews fought to get Tennessee whiskey as its own category for a really long time, they basically boxed everybody out. And so no matter where you were, if you said Tennessee whiskey, it was the equivalent of Jack Daniels. It wasn't, even though they fought for it to be treated separately and as a category, it wasn't actually extended to anyone outside of outside of their distillery. And so one of the biggest things that I had to do coming into this, and my team as well, is really educate on what exactly is Tennessee whiskey, because there was so much confusion out there. And was it last year? These years, it seems like 2020 has been so long that I can't remember if it was last year, but I think it was. I think it was Tales of the Cocktail 2019. And I did a seminar. I did 2 back-to-back seminars. And the seminar name, let me see if I remember this, was Kentucky Bourbon versus Tennessee Whiskey, Battle of the Premiums. And my argument was, because for so long, Tennessee whiskey has just been Jack, and you have a pretty large group of folks who look at Jack as something that's mixed, or don't necessarily look at that as especially super premium, but not necessarily premium, in part because of the price point, right?
Sure.
And so for so long, people didn't see Tennessee whiskey as being premium. So that was really a battle that we had coming into this, going, not only do they actually have premium products, I like their single barrel and their gold 27 and all that. Not only do they have premium products, but Tennessee whiskey, if you actually get down to it, it takes longer to make and it is more expensive to make than bourbon. And so you have a lot of folks. I mean, I've had people argue with me about the fact that bourbon can't be made outside of Kentucky. So you have contingency people who believe that too, right?
Well, I'll tell you, Fawn. See, I'm a lifelong Kentuckian, so my favorite thing is to always say it has to be made in Kentucky, even though I know that's not true.
Did you know that the Lincoln County process actually didn't begin in Tennessee? It actually, the first time we ever see it on record is actually in Kentucky. Did you know that?
I did not know that. Seriously? No, I didn't know. I didn't know that.
So the first time the Lincoln, obviously it wasn't called that until it came to Lincoln County. But the first time we ever see charcoal mellowing happening with whiskey was in the late 1700s. And it was, and I believe that a copy of the newspaper article, the clipping of it, is up at, oh gosh, I'm blanking on the name of the Fraser. Is that the name?
Fraser. Yep. Fraser Museum in downtown Louisville. Yep.
So they have it. And it shows that there was a woman who was filtering her whiskey through charcoal. That's the first time we ever see it.
Interesting. I had no idea. I had never heard that before.
And so even though a lot of the guys up in Kentucky have begun using it again, because it's just a great filtration process. And I've started to see it on folks' bottles, which I think is really interesting, that they've started putting on there that they have filtered their bourbon through sugar maple charcoal.
Yeah. I noticed that on Ezra, old Ezra 7 last year sometime. And then, all these people arguing. It's always just snap a picture of that bottle and post it and be like, okay, you can do it and still be a bourbon. Okay. So let's just move on from the whole silliness of arguing with each other about this. But so getting back to this, Matt, the 1884, I see you've had some time over there giving it some nose. What are you picking up on that?
Yeah, I jotted down some notes over here as I was just nosing along, and Fawn, I think you said exactly what I had written down. The first 2 things I wrote down were caramel and vanilla on the nose. I pick up a lot of the sweetness of caramel and vanilla, and then I found something, and it took me a little bit to put a word or a descriptor to it, and I pick up like pecans in it.
Yep.
And like the longer it's sitting out here, the more it's getting like juicier and fruitier, almost like picking up grapes, like a nice sweet grape to it. But
I kind of get that sweetness in terms of like almost like that bubblegummy kind of flavor that sometimes I'll pick out, and I can't say it's grape to me, but there is that sweetness, but there's that vanilla as well, Matt. So I agree with you on that. So now that we've kind of talked a little bit about the taste, or what we knows on it, can you tell us, Fawn, tell our listeners just a little bit about who you are, and how you got involved with what you're doing here?
Yeah, so I am the CEO of Uncle Nearest, the founder of Uncle Nearest, and I did not set out to start a whiskey company. I know most of the folks out here with whiskey companies set out to do that, but I actually didn't. When I arrived in Lynchburg, Tennessee for the first time, I was here to do research for the story, for the legacy of Nearest Green. At the time, we didn't know he was the first African-American master distiller in the world. We did not know that he was the first master distiller for Jack Daniel Distillery. At that time, when I arrived, all of that stuff came from my research. But when I arrived, the only thing that we knew is the New York Times. Clay Risen, an incredible journalist from the New York Times, had done a story saying that essentially in Lynchburg, Tennessee, the story that had been passed down from generation to generation was that the person who taught a young Jack Daniel was an enslaved man by the name of Nearest Green. And so that's all I had to go on when I showed up.
Wow.
But the thing that I think that those, especially if you're not African-American, I am, if for those who are not, one of the things that it's important to understand is, as African-Americans, because we were considered property, not people, we were not allowed to trademark, we were not allowed to patent. We really were never, if we had something, we would turn it over, but we would never be given credit for it. And so I'm 44. At that time, I was 39. I had never in my lifetime come across a brand, an American brand, a legacy brand that I was familiar with, that anyone had been able to actually prove that there was an African-American at the beginning of it. And
Right.
so the idea that it was even a possibility made the trip worth it for me. I could tell you without question, I did not plan to be here any longer than, and I kid you not, 4 days.
Wow.
4 days is how
awesome.
long the trip was. And the only reason I was here is because it was leading up to my 40th birthday. And I was so fascinated with the story. I told my husband, you know where I want to go for my birthday is, I think I want to do a research trip. I want to go to Lynchburg, Tennessee. And to say that he wasn't excited about that being the location I chose, I mean, for my 30th birthday, it was Paris. For my 35th birthday, it was Italy.
Oh, yeah.
And so he's like, I'm sorry, Lynchburg.
It's like,
And
wait,
so
what?
it took me every day of nagging him to even get him to agree, because he finally came to the conclusion that I was not going to let it go. So he might as well just do it. But the agreement was, you can go for 4 days. Well, we can go for 4 days, but whatever research I could not get in that 4 days, I'd have to do the rest from Los Angeles. There was absolutely no way we were coming back, and we were not staying longer than 4 days. So that was the plan. And when we showed up, I guess one of the things I should say is, in addition to being a longtime serial entrepreneur, I'm also a New York Times bestselling author, USA Today bestselling author. So I saw this as a very unique story that I could tell. And my husband is an executive vice president for Sony Pictures. And so I saw it as a good book that I could then turn into a movie. So,
Oh, yeah, sure.
so that was my mindset when I arrived. And I had read a book called Jack Daniel's Legacy. That is the only official biography of Jack Daniel. It was written in 1967, height of the civil rights era. And you had a white reporter from Tuscaloosa, Alabama, that comes to Lynchburg, Tennessee, to write the definitive biography of the most famous American whiskey maker of all time. I mean, that was the case then. It's the case and still now. And in this biography, there would have been absolutely, especially here in the South, there would have been no expectation whatsoever that a Black person would have been credited with anything, let alone written down. And not only did the author bring Nearest Green and his children into the story early on, continued to be throughout the book. And when we got to the end, that the amount of times that Nearest and his family were mentioned were more times than Jack's own family.
Wow.
So to me, that said, okay, there's something here between the lines that isn't being said, because not only would it not have been a requirement to include a Black man or to give a Black man credit for teaching the most famous whiskey maker who happened to be white, but it also would have been abnormal. And so it would have caused a few folks to turn heads, at least outside of Lynchburg. Now that I've been here long enough, I know it turned no heads in Lynchburg because everybody knew.
Yeah.
But side of Lynchburg, Tennessee, you've got everything. I mean, you've got Fayetteville, you've got right down the road where the KKK was founded. I mean, you just,
Yeah.
this isn't something that you're going to find in any other bourbon book, any other whiskey book. If you go up to Kentucky, well, you're in Kentucky.
We're in Kentucky.
All the distilleries in Kentucky. Can you name one Black person from that era who was involved in any of those brands?
I cannot. Matt?
No, nothing comes to mind.
And yet we know they all had them.
Yeah.
Right.
Right. And so the question for me became, well, then how do we know about this particular one? And what was clear to me, it was that Jack's family, who was interviewed for his biography, it's all the people who knew him best, his family that took over the distillery, his friends, his colleagues, all those, that's who was interviewed. And I concluded that they would have had to have mentioned Nearest and his family so many times that this reporter had to include them.
Sure.
And for that to be happening in 1967, I said, listen, I think this is a story of love, honor, and respect. And if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. But if I'm right, this is going to be a lot of fun to write. And that's how it began.
So Clay Rising wrote the story for New York Times. And so how did he know the story? Where did he get his information? Was he from the area, or was it just somebody that he knew?
Yeah. So ironically, he is from here. He is from Nashville, Tennessee. He and I were born on the same day, just in two different, I in Hollywood and he in Nashville. But the way that he found out is Brown-Forman had done a pitch for Black History Month. And it was one of those sort of top 10 things you didn't know about Jack Daniel, right? And it was meant to be specifically for Black History Month. And Clay received it like everybody else. And he honed in on one of the items that was there. And that item was, many people believe that the white preacher and distiller Dan Call was the teacher of Nearest Green. However, in Lynchburg, it has been said that it was actually his slave, Nearest Green. And Clay Rising, who he's not only the whiskey writer for New York Times, he's not only an associate editor, he's also a civil rights. So he saw that and said, screw, and that's all he cared about. And so he then went back to them and said, listen, stop pitching this. If you stop pitching this, I will do a feature on this. Yeah. And so he decided to do the feature story. Now, they didn't know that, unfortunately, they didn't know that that was all the story was about until the story hit the newspaper. And then all hell broke loose, because very quickly social media took that story, as did a lot of the press that really should have done their homework. But a lot of the press picked up the story, began regurgitating it. But then instead of having the title that the New York Times had, they then gave them their own clickbait titles, which just kept getting worse and worse and worse, until it became that Jack Daniel owned a slave. He stole the recipe. The slave. That's where the story began. Yeah. And so by the time I actually read Jack's book, the entire internet was completely dragging Jack Daniel and his family over having this, supposedly having this slave that they hid, that they stole the recipe. And I'm reading this book and going, well, if they were trying to hide this man, they sure picked a terrible place to hide him.
Yeah, no kidding. Well, hey, Fawn, I tell you what, we're at the end of round one here. So why don't we take a break real quick, get a word from our sponsor, and then we can pick back up and we can jump back in and talk some more, because you had mentioned Dan Call, and go back and we can maybe talk a little bit about the history of Uncle Nearest as well. I mean, the actual person himself, and the relationship there that developed, if we can do that. Does that sound
sure?
Accepted? Okay, good. All right. Well, I'll tell you what, everybody just sit tight, and we'll be back in just a minute with more with Fawn Weaver from Uncle Nearest Whiskey. So everybody just hang on. Thanks. Hey, Bourbon Lifers. When you're out hunting for those hard-to-find bottles or just enjoying the distilleries of Central Kentucky, you're going to work up an appetite. And when it's time to refuel, we suggest that you visit our good friends Rebecca and Eric Burnworth at the Stave Restaurant. Located at 5711 McCracken Pike in Millville, Kentucky, close to Castle and Key and Woodford Reserve, the Stave Restaurant is just off the beaten path, nestled on the banks of Glens Creek. Chef Jonathan Sanning prepares amazing food each day featuring an elevated Kentucky-inspired cuisine. You can take our word for it. The food alone is worth the trip to the Stave. With a full-service bar, great bourbon flights, and signature cocktails, the Stave is the perfect place to catch up with friends after a fun-filled day of touring the local distilleries. And you can even purchase bottles of bourbon to take home with you while you're there. Make sure to follow the Stave on Instagram and Facebook at The Stave Kentucky, or visit them online at thestavekentucky.com to stay up to date on everything that's going on. The Stave Restaurant is a bourbon lover's paradise, right here in the heart of bourbon country. All right, everybody, welcome back for round and or session 2, whichever you prefer to call it, of the Bourbon Life Podcast. I'm your host, Mark, and with me, as always, Matt. I'm sorry, I'm already laughing. Is Matt. Matt, what's up?
Hey, not much, Mark. What's up with you, man? You ready for session number 2?
Yeah, I am. It's funny because earlier today, I just wasn't feeling so good. I had a headache and I was like, oh man, I just don't know how I'm going to get through the show. And now here I am talking whiskey and having a little pour, and magically the headache is gone and I feel rejuvenated. I feel like a new man.
Yeah, you just needed to get back on that even keel, to get right again there.
There you go. That's right. Yeah. So with us tonight, we have Fawn Weaver, who's the CEO and founder of Uncle Nearest Whiskey in Tennessee. And Fawn has been telling us a little bit about how she got involved with this. And we'd really like to know, the history as well, the story behind Uncle Nearest himself. So Fawn, can you tell our listeners that story so they can understand where all this really came from?
Yeah, so it is the story of Uncle Nearest. It's interesting because it begins in Maryland, but because he was an enslaved man, we have no idea how he got to Tennessee. If he ever came through Kentucky on the way here, we don't have a way of knowing where he picked up the distilling side of things. We know that they were distilling in Maryland well before they were distilling here. And so we don't know if he came in as an experienced and skilled distiller. What we know is when we actually have record of him is when he is on the property of a man named Dan Call. The interesting thing about that particular preacher and distiller is that he never had any slaves on record. And a lot of people confuse that because his uncle has the exact same name, including the middle name. It's Daniel Houston Call, and he had quite a few slaves. But this particular Dan, did not. And so the question became, well, why were there slaves on the property?
Right.
And the still house. And when you would see situations like that, it was usually the case. It wasn't because it was, under the radar. That really didn't happen, because it's like trying to get away with not paying your property tax. So it wasn't that he had slaves and wasn't claiming them. What they would do if a enslaved person was a very skilled person, let's say a distiller or a blacksmith, something that they would be very expensive to purchase, they would lease them from their owners. So it is more likely than not that Nearest was being rented in order to distill. You're only going to do that if he was a very skilled distiller. And so the assumption is that he was a very skilled distiller before he ever landed on the property of Nearest Green, on the property of Dan Call. What we know from Jack Daniel's biography, and also in me spending time with Dan Call's family, is that they believe that Jack showed up somewhere around 7 years old. A part of my research did uncover exactly when Jack was born, because for whatever reason, it was out there that he was born in 1850, but his mother's death certificate clearly said January 27th, 1849. So either he was an absolute miraculous birth or he was born in 48. And what we know from his sister's diaries is that he was born in the fall. He was born it's been placed in September. And that means that his mother was 4 months. He was 4 months old when his mother passed away.
Okay.
So if you think about it, then it's not like now. You don't have formula. You didn't have Similac in bottles, right? So that means that Jack was wet nursed by his next door neighbor's wife.
Okay.
And so you have this kid that is growing up. He's the 10th child, and he is growing up without a mother. And his father did what most of the men during that time did, if they had a spouse that passed away. His mother only had typhus fever for 7 days. So imagine she's taking care of all of the kids, and 7 days later, he's taking care of 10 kids, including a 4-month-old.
Oh, wow.
Exactly. Didn't go over well.
Yeah.
So he almost immediately got married again. Within a year, he was remarried. And I get it. At that time, a man is like, whoa, I can't do this. I need to bring a woman in here to raise these kids. And that's exactly what he did. By all accounts, she was not a fan of Jack. Now, I don't know if that was the case with the other kids, but she was not a fan of Jack's. And when I saw a photo of her, I saw the photo. I said, yep, she looks really mean. I don't think I would have been in her house either. So now, I mean, nowadays we really coddle kids, right? They've got kindergarten.
Sure.
We're talking to them in gaga goo goo nonsense until they're 4. And
Right.
so we coddle children now. So we can't really wrap our minds around kids that are 7 years old and working. But at that time, they absolutely would have been a working hand at the farm.
Right.
And so you have Jack that shows up at the farm of Dan Call specifically to be a chore boy. That isn't a luxurious job that's on the inside. That's a job that is you're going out and running to the wells and grabbing the water, or you're milking the cows, or you're feeding the pigs and dealing with the slop and all the rest of that stuff. And on that property that he went to, at that time, it was 338 acres. We own it. So it's now 313. But at that time, it's 338. And you had a man who was a preacher and a distiller, and both his still site and his church were on the same property. So if you think about it this way, the property was basically divided up in a bit of a triangle. On one corner of the triangle was his home. On the other corner was the church. And on the other corner was the distillery. So he kept his 3 worlds separate, especially because he married a teetotaler.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Not a great idea if you're a distiller.
Yeah.
However, if you have a skilled distiller and the walk to the still house is 25 minutes, then you can keep your world separate. And that's precisely what he did. Nearest Green became the world's first African-American master distiller because he had full charge of the distillery. And I don't know that would have necessarily been the case if Dan Call wasn't trying to also be a preacher and trying to keep his wife away, but that's what it was. And so Jack shows up as a chore boy, but then he sees all this activity of wagons coming in and out on the other side and smoke, and keeps asking about, well, what is going on over there? And he's essentially being given the answer, that's grown folks' business, which you know how well that goes with kids.
Yeah.
Then they want to know more. And so according to Jack's biography, he was 8 years old when he was introduced to Nearest Green by Dan Call. And Dan Call introduced him by saying, this is Uncle Nearest. He's the best whiskey maker I know of. The reason why that statement actually matters is that there were 16 other distilleries in a 4-mile radius.
Oh, okay.
So that means in 1856, that Nearest Green had perfected something that was more special than the distillers around him. And what we know for sure are 2 things. Number one, that he utilized the Lincoln County process. The other thing that we now know that has come through the research is that process, obviously not called Lincoln County, but that process of taking something and filtering it through charcoal is distinctly West African.
Oh,
It is
okay.
the way, even to this day, that they filter water and they purify their food is with charcoal. I believe the stat is pretty staggering. It's something like 80% of the trees, even to this day, that are chopped down in West Africa are for wood fuel and for charcoal for the purposes of mellowing.
Interesting. So obviously something he had seen or known or experienced, participated in possibly, and then brought that knowledge with him. And then as part of his process there in Tennessee, was able to incorporate that into the whiskey production and the distilling process that he was engaged with there with Dan Call's operation.
Yeah, what's really great about Jack's family. So when a year before Jack passed away, Prohibition began in Tennessee. So I always say Prohibition killed Jack. But everyone has their reasons as to why they think Jack died. I'm like, no, Prohibition definitely killed him.
Yeah.
But he he knew that it was coming, and he turned the distillery over to his nephew, Lim Motlow, in 1907. Prohibition hits in 1910 here in Tennessee. So Tennessee was the first state into prohibition 10 years early, if you can believe that, 10 years before federal prohibition. So his nephew, Lim, brilliant as he was as a businessman, he literally closed up shop in Tennessee even before prohibition officially hit and moved the entire Jack Daniel distillery to St. Louis.
Oh, I never knew that.
Most people don't. So for 10 years until federal prohibition began, Jack Daniel Distillery was making its whiskey in St. Louis and Alabama.
No kidding. Huh.
That's where it was being made. So Tennessee was the first state in prohibition, the last state out of prohibition. And these, I got to love my teetotaler friends down here. They opened this state up county by county. And Lincoln County is the last county before you hit Alabama. So it didn't necessarily get here super fast. But you had this town that was really, really built on whiskey making. That's what it was. And what I love about Lim and his children, his 4 boys then took over the distillery after Lim passed away, is that they made sure that every time they were interviewed, they would mention, if someone asked about the Lincoln County process, they would credit the slaves who brought it in. If they mentioned Jack and his teaching, they were very clear in talking about the fact that he was taught by an enslaved man. And then specifically when listing the master distiller lineage, listing Nearest Green as the first.
Wow.
So that's how we actually learn the story. When I am in town for longer than 2 hours before I met Jack's eldest living descendant, at the time, her mother was still living. She passed away. Miss Mary Yvonne passed away at 105. Oddly enough, Nearest's eldest descendant at the time was 106. Yeah, she passed away at 108. So there's something in the water down here. It's move down to Lynchburg. You might live a little longer.
Yeah, but definitely sounds like it.
At the time, you had so many of the elders, right, that were still alive on both sides of the family that could give even not direct accounts of having touched Jack or touched Nearest, but having touched those who were their children, right?
Gotcha.
And so it's Lim Motlow's granddaughter who came into the library while my husband and I were sitting there amongst a ton of books trying to do research on this. And it was her that shared with us. She said, well, that book that brought you down here, which is referring to Jack Daniel's legacy. She said, you realize the farm where Jack grew up, where it says Nearest was and yada, yada, yada. You realize that's for sale.
Wow.
And she draws a map on a Post-it note.
Oh, gosh.
So we leave the library. We try to go find it. We don't have any luck because, Southern maps are special, right?
Yes.
So we ended up in the hills now that we have now lived here for all this time, we were so far off. Like we weren't even close to the Dan Call farm. But we got back into town and we weren't in town very long before my cell phone rang. And it was the cousin of this woman who was a realtor. And she says, my cousin tells me that you're working on this story about Nearest. You want to go to the Dan Call farm? I'd be happy to take you. You want to go tomorrow?
Oh, wow.
So this began to evolve from the moment I got to town.
That's crazy. I mean, it's like serendipitous. I mean, it's like things just
beyond. Listen, I mean, it is my belief, and I've believed this from the moment things began unfolding as they did, even before all of a sudden Uncle Nearest becomes the fastest growing independent American whiskey brand in U.S. history, the most awarded of this year and most awarded of next year. Even before all of that kind of stuff started happening, where you're like, look, this is somebody bigger than us. Well, before all of that, I had come to the conclusion that Nearest and Jack are sitting in heaven having a glass of whiskey and playing puppet strings. And for whatever reason, I got to be the lead puppet in this story. But rest assured, I am still a puppet because there are so many things that have happened that I would not be foolish enough to take credit for.
Yeah.
And that's one of them. I mean, what are the chances of that happening? What are the chances of that realtor actually we already know Jack descended on Jack's side of the family, on Lynn Motlow's side. And that realtor had retired from the family business after being there for 30 years. And the family business, of course, is Jack Daniel Distillery. And she retired as the head of whiskey operations. Guess what she is for Uncle Nearest?
What's that?
Head of whiskey operations.
Wow.
So she is the person who really, people will say to me, my God, how did you learn so much in this industry? I'm going, Sherry Moore, folks don't know this and they may not appreciate it. She was the first woman to run an operations department in American whiskey, period, hard stop. First one. And so there is no one who knows more about Tennessee whiskey that is living than Sherry Moore. No one.
Wow.
And I got to learn from that.
Yeah, that's crazy. So real quick, let's jump back because we're over halfway through. So I wanted to finish up on that small batch, the 1884, get some final thoughts. Matt, what you got on that, on the note or on the palate, and your finish on that?
I think the palate really rings true to the nose on it. It's a lot of caramel, a lot of vanillas coming through. I'm getting the oak. I can tell that it's an older product. It's got a nice leathery, oaky taste to it. And then I pick up where I think I was getting like a pecan or some sort of a nut. I'm getting like a peanut brittle, like a sweet peanut brittle on the palate with it.
Yeah.
It's really good.
Yeah.
So Mark, you were mentioning earlier that you were surprised by the color. Here's the interesting thing is because Victoria likes the sweeter notes, she tends to go away from the ones that have more oak, and those are usually your darker ones.
Gotcha.
And so there have been, I mean, I can tell you there have been times from batch to batch where the color difference, you would think that it was a 7-year-old versus an 8 or a 9-year-old. And nope, it's just what Victoria felt like that day. That's what she felt like.
Well, I will tell you that is really good. I really enjoyed the 1884. Matt, I think you feel the same way. I can tell you're smiling over there, obviously, on your notes.
It's got a really nice finish to it as well.
Does. It really does. I agree with that. So let's look at the 1856. Fawn, you want to tell everybody a little bit what we're going to be drinking next year?
Sure. And I will say, because Matt mentioned the finish on it, one of the things that Sherry was so helpful in, and I think it's one of the reasons why people enjoy the Uncle Nearest so much, is we have 3 separate filtrations. So we essentially have a triple filtration. You have the first filtration before it goes into the barrel. So that's the Lincoln County process, right? And then you have, as soon as we release from the barrel, it is sitting in natural carbon from coconut shells.
Oh,
fun fact, Sherry is such a filtration nerd that she was the treasurer for the Filtration Society. And when I tell you, if you ever want to have a podcast in which you talk about filtration for a full 60 minutes, she's your girl.
She can do it.
It is unbelievable because she tested so many different, there's natural carbon in so much. I mean, there's natural carbon in wood, there's natural carbon in so much. And she tested all of them and determined that the one that was the best was natural carbon from coconut shells because it removes without adding anything. It removes congeners, removes fusel oils, but it does not add anything at all. Which it always makes me laugh because you have sort of the power of suggestion. So whenever I tell people that and they're about to do a tasting, the next thing I say is you are not going to taste coconut. You taste coconut, it's the power of suggestion.
I'm glad you brought it up and you said that, and we've already tasted through because now I'm going back and looking at it and being like, maybe there's coconut. Maybe I missed it. Maybe I want to.
It is simply. I mean, when you look at that carbon, if you toss it into the air, you will barely see it. It is much finer than sand. It's almost like it's closer to powdered sugar. If powdered sugar were black,
gotcha.
It's very, very fine. And so it sits in that, and we're sitting in it for 28 to 48 hours. And then after that filtration, we are then running it through on a continuous basis for another 24 hours through diatomaceous earth.
Goodness.
And so the diatomaceous earth, if you go into a health food store, you will see it because it cleanses out your body. Well, funny enough, it does the same thing to all the crap in whiskey that you don't necessarily want. But the question becomes, how do you remove the stuff you don't want, but make sure you don't remove the fatty acids and things that you do want, and
Right.
that you don't remove any of the flavor, you don't remove any, not that much of the color. And that's really what Sherry is brilliant at, is knowing what is that calibration, how many times is it running through, and she will look at it to make sure if it starts pulling out too much color, shut it down. And but that's where a part of that smoothness comes from. And each one of our expressions all have a triple filtration.
Wow. So this 1856 that we're getting ready to do, that's obviously triple filtration.
Yep.
Now this one is 100 proof, so it's a little bit higher proof, not much.
Mhm.
And what's this is a blend of different ages, is that right?
It
The barrel?
is. It started off as being a blend of 8 to 11, but we began adding some more older barrels in there. And so the current batches, for instance, have up to 15-year-old.
Oh,
And
wow. Okay.
but again, it's never, we're a little interesting in that we're never trying to mirror the exact same taste from batch to batch. We're just trying to get the best taste out of each batch. And if it's similar, great. If it's not, I don't care, as long as it's a gold medal winner or a double gold. That's it. That's all.
Yeah.
That's all we care about. And so I know a lot of people really focus on that consistency from bottle to bottle. All I care is that it's great from bottle to bottle.
Yeah, it's funny because we had Sean Josephs on the show from Pinhook Bourbon a couple of months ago, and Sean had owned some restaurants in New York, and then also had some experience in the wine industry, and that's their philosophy as well, which I found, and Matt and I were really impressed with that, is that it wasn't from batch to batch and bottle release to release that they want everything to taste the same. It was that they want the barrels really to guide them. And as they start tasting and mixing things together, they just want to put out something that tastes good, that they enjoy, that they like. And from bottle to bottle, blend to blend, you may end up with different things. So
Yeah.
that's
Yep.
pretty unique.
Yeah. So what you have there is likely, depending on when you got the bottle, it's likely a blend up to 14 or up to
Okay.
15-year-old. So it's going to be a lot darker because, one, it is 100 proof. We add very, very little water in our bottle. So here's the beauty of what we know about Nearest's process. A part of what made it so good, a lot of people will point to the recipe. It doesn't matter. Everybody in this area was using the same recipe, slight variations, but for the most part, everybody was using the same recipe, and they would use slight variations depending on the season. So
Okay.
you'd have one recipe you'd use for, this 12 weeks, and another one for this 12 weeks. And so the recipe really didn't matter as much as the process. So you had the Lincoln County process, but you also had Nearest putting his whiskey in at 110 and intentionally proofing it. Well, let me not say he intentionally proofed it down. It would have proofed down because the entire time Jack Daniel was alive, he never had more than a one-story warehouse.
Okay.
Well, the first story never gets as dark as the higher stories. And
Right.
so even our Rick House at Nearest Green Distillery is one story.
Okay.
And so we are intentionally proofing it down. And so because of that, in part, you're going to get lighter colors. But also what's nice about it is when it comes out, when it's released from the barrel, it's releasing at 101, 102, sometimes 103, sometimes even 98, 99. So when it gets blended together, the amount of water we have to add to get it to 100 is very, very minimal. So it's about as pure of a whiskey as you're going to get without it being barrel strength.
I was going to say it's almost barrel strength. Obviously you're not proofing down much at all on that. That's really good. Matt, what are you getting on the nose on this one?
I'm picking up a lot of like juicy fruit again, like strawberries, maybe a little like raspberry or like some currant or maybe like raisin. It's got, the nose is somewhat reminiscent of like something I would pick from a red wine, maybe some plum. Definitely, I'm picking up on the age of it more than just the beautiful color of the whiskey itself, but the oak is coming through and a little bit of leather on it as well. And I think that's really unique, Fawn, that you all do a different blend with different flavoring, each different characteristics each time. I think it's pretty gutsy to do for a brand to make a name and then each batch comes out a little different. That's really unique. Are your bottles, I don't have the bottle in front of me, but are the bottles labeled with different batch
No.
numbers or
Well,
is it-
no, let's see. On the 1884, I think we ended up not. No. Mm-mm.
Yeah,
But
I'm looking at it. I don't see a batch number
Yeah.
or anything on here. So
The only ones we do that with is our single barrel.
okay.
But I think also if you go from having a really good bottle to having a not so great bottle, then you might be bothered. But we've been very, very, very fortunate that our blends are just really good. And so sometimes you're going to pick up more stone fruit. Sometimes you're
Mhm.
going to pick up more of the juicier fruit. Sometimes you'll get more butterscotch. Sometimes you'll get more caramel and vanilla. But what you're not getting is like really funky off notes, right? And that's the only part that we care about is from batch to
Mhm.
batch, is it really good?
Yeah.
And if it's really good, it's going in the bottle.
Well, this when I first poured it, and this isn't necessarily a funky note, but when I first smelled it, I actually smelled buttered popcorn.
We get that a lot.
You
We
did? Oh,
get
okay.
that. You are not the first. It's actually one of the main characteristics that people pick up on
Okay.
the nose is buttered popcorn.
Yeah, it was funny because Matt has said that on a couple things before, and I've just never been able to. So I always get excited because Matt's got a great palate. He's got a great nose, and I mean he can pick out things, and he'll say things, and I just can't find that in the whiskey. So as soon as I poured this and I gave it a nose, I was like, I actually smell buttered popcorn. So Matt, I'm thrilled. I actually smelled buttered popcorn before. So good. I'm glad I wasn't off on that, Fawn. I'm glad you.
No, I get that. Butter popcorn. I can tell you the flavor notes we get the most is buttered popcorn, stone fruit, vanilla, caramel, and butterscotch. Those are
Okay.
the 5 that we get the most.
Well, that makes a lot of sense. So I'll tell you what we'll do because we've run over for the second episode or second session, which obviously we don't care, but we should probably take a little bit of a break, get a word from our sponsor, and then we'll come back with our third and final session with Fawn Weaver from Uncle Near. So everybody just sit tight and we'll be back in just a second. Hey, Bourbon Lifers. We want to take just a second and tell you a little bit about Three Chord Whiskey. Three Chord's line of whiskeys embody the spirit of creativity. The whiskey is a true collaboration between producer and composer Neil Giraldo and master blender distiller Ari Sussman. The Three Chord team of expert blenders, coopers, and sensory professionals have developed a multi-step process they call perfectly tuned taste. This process begins by carefully selecting the finest bourbon and rye whiskeys from Kentucky, Tennessee, and Indiana, and then blending them all together. After each blend is completed, the Three Chord team then applies their proprietary process of pyrolysis, that's a lot to say, isn't it? Which involves heating American oak to precise temperatures to release specific flavor and aroma compounds. Then they use another proprietary method called rhythmic disruption process, and that's more than just playing music to a bunch of barrels, which integrates all of those related compounds into the blended spirit. Finally, each small batch blend of Three Chord is evaluated by a trained sensory panel to ensure an uncommon depth of flavor, character, aroma, and a perfectly tuned taste in each bottle. With their introductory blended bourbon, their Amplify Rye, Strange Collaboration, which is a Pinot Noir finished Kentucky bourbon, their 94 rated 12-bar reserve, and the brand new highly coveted 15-year Kentucky bourbon they call the Whiskey Drummer, there's a lot of options available from Three Chord. Like the feeling you get when you hear that perfect song, you'll know that the Three Chord line of whiskeys are right from the first sip. They resonate with so much flavor, you'll want an encore. Find out more about Three Chord whiskeys and distribution in your area at www.threechordbourbon.com. All right, everybody, welcome back for the third and final segment, session round, whichever you prefer, of the Bourbon Life Podcast. I'm your host, Mark. As always, with me is my good friend, my buddy, Matt. Matt, you hanging in there?
Absolutely, I am. I'm wondering though. You kind of said that as always, in a little bit of an ambiguous, like you're Mark as always, or you're back with Matt as always?
I know, Matt. I said that and I was like, wait a second. Was that for me as I'm
Yeah.
Mark as always? Or could I be somebody different
After like
tonight?
a
I'm not
certain
really
time at night, do you turn into someone else?
You know what, Matt? I tell you what. I told you I had a headache earlier today. So I'm doing the best I
Hey,
can.
I'll quit
I'm
busting the
pushing-
chops there. You're doing
pushing
great,
through.
Mark.
And we should tell everybody we are still social distancing, Matt. We're obviously recording through Squadcast.
Mm-hmm.
Matt and I are in the same location, but we're in different areas of that same location. So we're not hanging out in the same room, breathing all over each other and coughing and hacking or anything like that. So we're practicing our social distancing as we're supposed to do. So and Fawn, of course, is down in Shelbyville, Tennessee. And speaking of which, Fawn Weaver from Uncle Nearest Whiskey is with us. So welcome back for round 3.
Thank you. Thanks for having me back.
Well, we appreciate it. Matt, you want to say what you always say?
Oh, yeah. To our listeners and everyone else, you've made it this far, so you better stick around for the exciting conclusion.
That's right. No doubt. So we're on this 1856, and we've been talking the stories. We talked about Fawn, of how you got involved, and obviously your passion for this, the story of Uncle Nearest. So let's talk a little bit about the whiskey itself. Now, so these are barrels that you've purchased, correct? Or are these okay? So you've bought
we can't. We couldn't age them that fast, unless we use that newfangled stuff they're doing of shaking barrels to music. No. We couldn't do
it. All right. So these are. I'm sorry. So wait, these are sourced, right?
They are. Everything that we have are sourced, and I think it's a part of the reason why we take so much time with the process once it comes to us. Number one, we buy the barrels and then we continue to age them, and we continue to age them on the lower floors. And so by the time we finish blending, our product does not taste like our source. And our source, don't get me wrong, we're starting off with a phenomenal product. But if you put them side by side, which people do blind all the time, you are not going to think that they are. You may think they're related, but you certainly won't think they're the same.
Yeah. Gotcha. Okay. That makes sense. So can you say where you source from, or are you like on the whole?
I wish. It's absolutely not me. It's funny. The master distiller and we have this conversation and we laugh about it all the time. We're like, with the volume that we're doing, it literally can only come from 3 places. And I'm very clear in saying it's not Jack. So we just knocked out one.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
But we've always worked with 2, and both of them in Tennessee, both had me under non-disclosures. One released me from the non-disclosure, which is Tennessee Distilling Group. So I can say that we have been laying down our own whiskey and barrels everything under Sherry's direction. We've been doing that since 2017.
Okay.
And so I'm super excited when those come of age. But our second source, even though I've had this conversation with them multiple times, I was like, guys, come on, at this point. But that is just, it's come from the higher ups that they do not want it out. Not specific to Uncle Nearest. It's the requirement they have with anyone who sources from them.
Sure. And we run into that a lot. But, on the show, we wouldn't be doing our job as bourbon nerd podcasters if we didn't ask those questions, right? So
yeah, and maybe one day someone will tickle me really hard and get it out. I don't know. But as of right now, the funny thing is that the folks that are at their distillery are super proud of what we've done. I mean, we've made so much history here. And so they're super proud of it. And so I had a team member, we've never talked about it internally in our company. And I had a team member go to visit their distillery and had on an Uncle Nearest jacket. And I think he had on Uncle Nearest hat as well, Richie Michaels, who you guys probably know because he's our rep up there in Kentucky. And he went to the distillery. I had never said anything. I've never disclosed the source, not even internally. We've not had those conversations. And he shows up at the distillery and they see it and they were like, Uncle Nearest, do you know Fawn? He's like, oh my gosh. So he's on a tour. So they start telling everybody else on the tour, he's with Uncle Nearest, and start literally telling a part of our story. And it's like, it's our juice in their bottles. So he comes back. And I actually, at the time, I don't know if you've ever spent time with the guys that founded the British Bourbon Society out of there in London, but they were here visiting and staying at our B&B. And so we're actually all in a room together tasting so many wonderful bourbons. And I think we were on Whistle Pig. So we were having a rye at that time. I think we were on Whistle Pig when he walks through the doors and he goes, I think I know something I'm not supposed to know. So yes, I think it is the most absurd, non-disclosure ever, but I got to stick to it.
Nope. We completely understand that. But now, so Tennessee Distilling, they are actually distilling your own mash bill for you all now and putting that down?
They are doing it. They are doing it specific to our process, specific to our barrel staves that, so everyone has so many different things that they can do. You can take a ton of whiskey out of the same exact warehouse, same exact floor, but if you put it into barrels that are charred differently, different types of, you're just going to get very different flavors from all of them. And so they are going off of our profile. I got a chance to taste them when they turned 2 years old. And man, I'm so excited for that to come of age. But yes, we've been laying down our own. We actually just finished our first rick house at Nearest Green Distillery in Shelbyville. And so we're going to begin transporting our first couple thousand barrels over very soon. So I'm super excited about that.
Wow. That's incredible. So now going back to the success, obviously we've kind of alluded to the success, the things that have happened. Can you just, you guys have, it's been crazy. That's the best way to say it. So,
you can try to find us on a shelf. Good luck. I actually had to have my husband stop buying Uncle Nearest because, in the beginning, when you're trying to get stores to take you seriously, the retailers take you seriously, you go into restaurants, you order your own product, you go into the bar, into the retail stores, and you buy your own bottles and all the rest of that stuff. And just so that you can talk about the story and also so they know that you're going to support the pull through, all the rest of that stuff. And it got to a place earlier this year that I told my husband I needed him to buy somebody else's whiskey. because it literally hits the shelves, it flies off the shelves. It's a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful problem to have. This year, I think we'll land somewhere around 125,000 cases. If we were not out of stock so much on the shelves, we probably would have pushed closer to 175,000. So it is definitely not normal. Again, puppet strings. I always, whenever people try to give me credit, I am so quick to deflect it and they'll go, oh, you're so humble. I go, no, I'm not. I understand it's a puppet string and I understand that I am not this good. I am not this brilliant of a marketer. And it's literally like everything we try works. When have you ever heard that in this industry? Right?
Yeah. I think if there's been like any theme from pretty much every company or person we've had on, it's like, okay, well, the bottom fell out, this happened, something collapsed, and here's how we pieced something together out of it and made the story. So that's incredible.
And meanwhile, we're building out a $50 million distillery
that's crazy.
That we have people literally, it's really funny because at the distillery, because we opened up phase 1 last September and we had it open until we shut it down for COVID. But because the gates are open due to construction on phase 2, people show up every single day for our Uncle Nearest 1820 because it's only there at the distillery. And I tease our manager who's there at the distillery because every day I see thousands of dollars of sales coming through. And I'm like, you guys do understand what closed means, right? Just out of curiosity. But people literally walk around and they just want to come in and get that bottle. And then they come in, they're like, oh, can I get a t-shirt? And can I get a hat? And can I get a, and so we're really fortunate that people understand that so much history has been made, is being made with this brand. This is the first time that a brand came out of the gate and determined to not only put together a team that looked like America, but also that we marketed to all of America. So when you look at bourbon whiskey as a category, the drinker, they all look like you. It's 60% white male. coming into this industry, everyone really talks about the stats, and I refused to know the stats coming into it. When anyone would try to talk to me about the stats, I had a feeling. I didn't know that it was that slanted, but I had a feeling, but I didn't want to know about any stats because I did not want it to skew how we marketed. We were going to market to everyone from day one. And we're going to bring everyone together so that what we did mirrored what the world looks like, what America looks like. And it's the first time that it's been attempted where you didn't have, a multicultural department talking to one group and have these guys talking to another group and have everybody targeting this very, the 60% of white men. We literally said, we're going to share this legacy with everyone. And if they buy a bottle of whiskey with it, awesome. If they just share his legacy, we're good with that too. And there's just something about that seems to have resonated with every race, with every gender. Believe it or not, our whiskey buyers are 50% women. That's insane.
Wow.
Really?
Mm-hmm. Especially when you consider we don't have anything under 93 proof.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, 93 proof and 100 proof, and then your single barrels. I mean, that's pretty impressive. We need to work on that for our listenership and for our Instagram followers, because we're only at like 19% female. What's up with that?
Well, I think maybe you need to add a woman to your. There you go.
There you go.
Yeah, that will definitely make our podcast better looking.
So, one of the things that are really unique about Uncle Nearest, I did not come into this and say, I'm going to put together an all female badass leadership team. That was never my intention. It's just, I pulled the people who really came and made sense. So you had Sherry Moore. Well, why would I have anybody else head up whiskey operations when she knows more than everybody who's alive in Tennessee whiskey? And
Right.
then Catherine Jerkins brought her in to head up our sales and marketing globally. And then Victoria Edie Butler, our master blender. And it wasn't until, I want to say maybe it was about a year and a half ago, I was sharing about all of our executive team and to some member of the press. And they said, wait, so your whole executive team are women? Do you know, I'd never thought about it. And that moment, because we have quite a few VPs that are male. Mm-hmm. So I'd never actually thought about the fact that our entire executive team were women, and that's never been done before. So I think that that's a part of why we are 50% women, is that they can actually see themselves in this brand. You have me, who it's the first time that a woman has founded and led a successful American whiskey brand, period, of any race.
Yeah. And the fastest growing ever. I mean,
without question.
Yeah.
I every time we look at it and we try to find someone that has even come close, it just doesn't happen. We're only 3.5 years in the market.
It just blows me away. I mean, I remember, when you first started, or, information started coming out, and it was like, I mean, it's a great story, and I didn't know a lot about it, but now having the whiskey, talking to you, I mean, it just brings it all together, and the passion that you have for this. And that's what we talked a little bit in the break. Matt and I we're very passionate about bourbon and whiskey, and we want to share that passion with as many people as we can. And you are like that, but to like the nth degree, which is awesome. It's awesome. I mean, it's great.
Mm-hmm.
When people talk to my team, my sales team out in the field, one of the things they will comment on is their level of passion reminds people more of folks that are working for a nonprofit than an actual for-profit company. But I think a part of that is for us, selling whiskey was always secondary. It was cementing the legacy of Nearest Green. So generation after generation after generation, this story is never having to be recovered again. That it is, when you're looking at that Mount Rushmore of whiskey, it should be Jim, it should be Johnny, it should be Jack, and it should be Nearest. Those are the four that should be on there 100 years, 200 years from now. So that's what we set out to do. And if I will do tastings all the time, or I'll go into groups, and I don't care if I'm talking to a group of teetotalers, because what I care about is when they leave here, are they going to share the story of Nearest Green? And so I think because our focus was cementing Nearest's legacy and getting so many people to share the story, all of our marketing was story driven. I think because of that, when people would buy the whiskey, they weren't expecting it to be good. right? So
Right.
they're
Yeah.
buying it sort of as a, oh, well, the story is great. We want to help cement the legacy, and they're all about that. And then they taste it and go, oh wow, yeah, no, I'm not going back to any other whiskey again, because now they have a great product with a story that is so purely American.
Right.
And it's
Mhm.
I just happen to think it's a really remarkable story and an incredible legacy. So I get
Yeah.
to talk about it all the time, and I don't get tired of it, which is nice.
Well, and the marketing that you're doing, I saw on your website today the video that you all have done, and now I guess it's actually kind of a mini movie.
Oh,
Um,
the short story with
yeah,
the short film
yeah,
with Jeffrey
yeah,
Wright.
Jeffrey Wright.
Yeah.
That I mean, I got chills. I mean, I did just watching the video. It's just, I mean, Jeffrey Wright is just, I mean, he's badass. I loved him,
So
and
badass. He's doing Batman right now in the UK,
yeah,
and he sends
yeah.
me text messages, and he's like, "Hey, can I get some 1820 here for my castmates?" He's, Jeffrey is just an incredible human being. But here's how this I think goes, and it speaks to the story. It speaks to the fact that so many people have become a part of wanting to help to cement the legacy of the first African American master distiller. The way Jeffrey that he even came to that, I wasn't looking for a celebrity to represent the brand. That was never, ever, ever a part of anything that we were thinking. And his people reached out to my people, and
Yeah.
and
Right.
and his people kept reaching out. They were quite tenacious, love them, but it was a very small crew in the beginning. There was three of us, just myself, Catherine, and Stephen, and so we were all over the place doing GSMs, doing all the presentations, and so they kept reaching in, and I wasn't responding, and finally they said, "Listen, our client wants to talk to Fawn immediately," and so I sent a text message to Nears's family. They were all, all on my text phone. I said, "Hey, this guy wants to talk to me." And because we weren't looking for any celebrities, I was a little hesitant. And I said, "Hey, this
Sure.
guy wants to talk to me. What do you guys think?" And they all just began responding with all their favorite parts he had ever done. And so Nears's family was so excited. So I get on the phone with him, and Jeffrey says, "Fawn, you got to let me be a part of this." And to know Jeffrey is to know he's such an amazing, amazing guy. But he says, every bar and restaurant that I go to, I sit at the bar, I tell the story of Nearest Green. I make sure if they don't have the product, they know the story, they're getting it. He said, and it dawned on me the last time I was telling your story that I'm selling your product. So if I'm going to sell your product, I should probably be invested in your company.
Yeah.
So will you take my money? I mean, this is
Oh man.
and at the time I wasn't doing a capital raise. I think it was it was, I had already done the Series A. This was this time of the Series B. And so I wasn't taking any money. And I said, "Listen, when I do a capital raise, you will be my first phone call." And he says, "Okay, well, if you won't take my money, can I help you to at least spread the word?"
Yeah.
That's how that film came to be.
Man, and it's awesome, Matt. If you haven't seen it, you need to check it out. And all of our listeners need to get on the Uncle Nearest website and check that. And like I said, Jeffrey Wright is just and I love him, especially like in the Bond movies too. I mean, he's like so like just chill and laid back, but such a badass when he does it.
Yes.
So
He's so good, and you have some actors who only appeal to one particular segment, or they stay in a genre. What I
yeah,
love most about Jeffrey is he goes wherever he feels passionate. I've seen him turn down roles that I think people would absolutely jump at. And he's like, if he's not passionate about it, he won't do it. So even when filming that short film, all of us on there, because that's filmed, by the way, at the house that Jack
at the
grew up.
house. Yeah,
Yep,
yeah.
the Dan Call Farm. And so we're all there. The whole crew is like, "We got it." And Jeffrey goes, "Nope, let's do it again." When I tell you, he probably did that 10 times, where they were
Dude,
all looking at each other like, "We got it the first time." But he is such a perfectionist. And to him, he is a part of the same stewardship that we all feel that we have for this story and for this legacy. And he took it so incredibly seriously. And I'm happy he did, because I think it turned out perfect.
yeah, it's like 10 minutes, a little over 10 minutes, maybe,
Mhm.
something like that. But
Yeah.
it's excellent. I mean, it's definitely something that people need to watch. just a great story and a great little short film there. So now, Fawn, do you have a barrel pick program in place? Are you guys doing those yet, or is that on?
We were before we started selling out everything
Oh,
everywhere,
yeah, okay.
and the distillery that was supposed to be closed doesn't seem to be when it comes to the 1820, because I think I got a text message earlier that we're out of stock again at the distillery, which is absurd. So we were doing it before, but the demand of it is so great. Every time we release a barrel online, it doesn't even last 60 seconds.
Wow.
So it is, we are not offering that right now, but it's only because the demand at the distillery is so far out. It's so outpacing our
Sure.
ability to even put it in a bottle. So no,
That's a great problem to have.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's a
absolutely.
it's
really, really fortunate, a really fortunate problem.
yeah. So Matt, let's get back a little bit to the 1856, and in terms of the palate and the finish. What do you get on that? What are you getting on it? I don't think we talked about the nose, but
Yeah, we hit the nose. We haven't gone to the palate here. So I get a lot of the vanilla and the caramel will come through like right at the start on the tip of the tongue, right at the front of the palate. And then I get a little bit of honey comes into it. And then it's got just this really, really great savory and peppery flavor to it. It's got nice heat. I'm picking up a peppery, like peppercorn type heat, and the finish on it again. It's another, just like the small batch that we had in the first session. It's got a really great finish with the flavor lasting. It's got a good heat, nice little tingle on the tongue. It's really well rounded, really well balanced, and it hits a lot of really great notes with the vanilla, the caramel, a little bit of the oak, and then that there's something savory. Mark, you had said buttered popcorn. I don't know if I'm getting like buttered popcorn, say, but there's a really savory, nice oily taste to it, and then just a sweetness like toasted sugar and honey, and
yeah.
but I really get like a nice peppery spice on
Yeah.
it.
On that finish, I definitely do. When the initial taste, like you said, you get that sweetness up front. It's, to me, it was almost like a brown sugary kind of a taste, but then that sweetness dissipates a little bit, and then that pepperiness, the spiciness comes in. Fawn, can you tell us what the mash bill is, or we didn't talk about that? I don't know if you can say or not, but
Oh yeah, that part. I don't. If I'm under NDA, I'll be in trouble. So the mash bill is 84 corn, 8% rye, 8% barley.
Okay.
okay.
Wow. The rye comes through a whole lot more than I was expecting when you said it's only
it does.
8% rye. That's the finish.
I'm surprised. I'm kind of surprised at that. I expected. I was thinking it'd probably be in more the 15 to 20 range, or even higher than that. So kind of surprised about that.
Yeah,
But
Victoria's
definitely
done
another.
a great job in blending that. You said that she really pays attention on the finish and likes that. Gosh, I'm still getting the finish on it as I'm sitting here talking. Using my
It
train of
is a
thought.
long finish,
She's
which
done a
is, I'm
remarkable
always
job.
bummed when I have a bourbon or an American whiskey in general, and it has a short finish. So I do love the long finish on it.
Oh yeah. Fawn, you can text Matt in 3 days, and he'll tell you that he's
Yeah,
still getting
it'll
that.
still be rolling around on my tongue here. And a lot of bourbons and whiskeys that we've had that have finishes, the finishes, it's just like heat. It's like a burn, and you talk about, oh, it's got a great finish, but really all you're getting is, or all that I might pick up is just heat. And this actually, it's flavor. Like the finish on it, I'm picking up flavor, the pepperiness, and it's just it's like really cerebral. It's got a really great finish.
I think that there is great benefit to those barrels being on the lower floors. I'm always pretty surprised when I talk to different distillers, whiskey makers that consider, and to each his own, absolutely to each his own, but they consider the higher floors as being the better tasting. And I have always preferred the lower floors. There's just something about it. I think it's more well-rounded. I think that you don't get the level of heat. Also, it's so well balanced because you're adding such a small amount of water.
Right.
And I do think that a lot of times, depending on how much water is added, it does change the flavor quite a bit. I was tasting a rum, and I mean, it's not a bad rum, but I was tasting a rum the other day, and it was I want to say it was like a 17-year-old, and it was a really good rum. But what I could not stop tasting is New York tap water. And New York tap water is delicious, but that was on the finish for me.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. That doesn't sound like much fun. That's not what you want.
I mean, it made a great daiquiri, but I don't, yeah.
So, all right, Fawn, let me ask you this. 6-7 years ago, you had written a New York Times bestseller. Did you ever in your wildest dreams imagine that 6-7 years down the road that you're going to be the owner of one of the fastest growing ever whiskey?
No, come on. I'm the child of two teetotalers. My mother, when this began coming out, she was so proud of the story, but she says to me, "Baby, I love what you're doing for this man and for his family, but I sure wish he made lemonade." So I am a preacher's child. I am the child of two teetotalers. So no, absolutely not. You could not have paid me to believe that this is where I would find a lifelong dedication. But there's
Well,
so much to do in this short period of time that I have on earth. And I want to make sure that on the other side of it, the way that I put it is we are building this brand so quickly and so big that whoever comes in the next generation cannot screw it up. That's what we're doing.
wow. That's awesome. And you guys are doing a lot of great things too
Mhm.
through the brand. You're doing a lot of great community work and things like that. Do you want to talk about that briefly? The
Yeah.
things and the programs that you have in place. It's like we could probably talk another 20 minutes and 30 minutes, and I don't want to drag that out, but I think it's important to let people know, that it's not just about making whiskey, and that it goes beyond that, and the things that you're doing, with Jack Daniels as well, and the things you guys are doing. Can you talk a little bit about the
Sure,
initiative?
that'd be a whole other 20 minutes. So I'm going to give you the most truncated version ever. The Nearest Green Foundation preceded Uncle Nearest Premium Whiskey. So the Nearest Green Foundation has always, from the very moment I became involved in this story, met Nearest Green's family, that we have always paid for. If you are college age and you are a blood descendant of Nearest Green, if you are in college, you have a full ride. We're paying for it.
Wow.
And in the beginning, it was my husband and I paying for it. And then once Uncle Nearest came out and it was making money, that began paying for it. But we've had 13 or 14 students so far, and every semester we add on.
Nice.
And they're at graduating, and we had our first graduate with honors from the University of Tennessee, and then go on to the University of Alabama for her master's. And so for us, it's not just putting them through to their bachelor's, but it's if they want to go all the way to their PhD, we have one that we're paying to study for the LSAT and to get into, I think it's the LSAT, to get her JD, to become an attorney. So
Sure.
we stay with them the whole entire way, because the thought process was there was a 30-year gap from the time their family was wealthy and entrepreneurs. Nearest Green became the wealthiest African-American in the area. He was wealthier than a lot of his white neighbors in that period of time is remarkable. And his grandchildren and great-grandchildren all had land, were great business people or very skilled at what they did. And so that legacy of excellence, it's sort of kind of over time diminished. And if you think about it, if the whole family is in a particular industry and the industry disappears for 30 years, that is going to be a challenge. And so when I met the young people in the industry, in this family, it was very clear to me that they did not see and understand that they came from such a legacy of excellence. And so I wanted to help them get back to that. So that's the first thing. But beyond Nearest's family, we have done a couple of things. Being in this industry, I noticed very early on that I didn't get resumes from African Americans, and I didn't get resumes from Blacks at all. But even when I was looking to hire African Americans, I couldn't find any. And so my thought process was, well, if I, as an African American, can't find any, then how in the world is anyone else in this industry? And so the question became, where is the pipeline for this? How are we getting these guys interested for them to those that are in college or in high school for STEM, for them to even see this as a career? And so I began working with the president of Motlow State College to create the first distilling school that is accredited. And there have been others that have started, but this is the first that will be accredited. And as we began working on it, he says, okay, who's going to write the curriculum? And the first person who I thought of, other than Sherry Moore, of course, was someone who she hired when she was at Jack Daniel, which is their VP, their AGM, Melvin Keebler. And so I asked for the two of them if they would be willing to write the curriculum. Well, of course, if I'm going to ask Melvin, I better ask his bosses. And so I went to the Brown Forman folks and said, hey, this is what we're doing. Would you guys like to be a part of this? And I mean, it took 2 seconds for Campbell Brown and Matthias Bentley to go, absolutely. And so we have been working on that. And then the pandemic hit. And for us, we immediately, I know a lot began doing sanitizer. We began acquiring N95 masks to protect the front line, the folks on the front line, and began distributing that. So that's a whole other story. But between the communities and the frontline workers, we've distributed about 300,000 masks.
Wow.
So that's the pandemic side. And then on top of that, after we had the deaths very quickly of Ahmaud Arbery, and then George Floyd, and then Breonna Taylor, with those three coming back to back, and our country finally having a true reckoning, we knew that this was a moment where we could truly do something special. We could push every boundary that there ever has been in order to diversify our industry. And the folks at Brown Forman reached into me, the leadership, and said, hey, what can we do on this? And we really talked through it. And what we ended up doing is both pledging $2.5 million each to form the Nearest and Jack Advancement Initiative. And we've got, in addition to the Nearest Green School of Distilling, we also have an apprentice program. I don't know if you've ever spoken to Tracy Franklin, but we stole her from Glenn Fiddick to be the first head distiller apprentice. She had previously apprenticed under Dave Pickerel, but was never able to find anything on the distilling side in our industry. So she went into sales and marketing, and we snatched her back and put her back over in the distilling side.
Nice.
And she's been shadowing some of the best distillers. But when she becomes a master distiller, once that apprentice program ends, she will be the first following Nearest Green of African American descent, which in and of itself is insane that it took this long. But hey, I'm just grateful it's here. And then we also have an apprentice that is for operations and distillery operations. There's not been an African American to oversee a plant.
Right.
And then we've got the next one is head of maturation. And so we're just filling these slots with apprentices and doing, I guess if the Nearest Green School of Distilling is sort of the slow roast version to fill the pipeline, this leadership acceleration program is the microwave version of filling the pipeline. And then the third thing is the business incubation program, where we have come alongside Black-owned businesses in the spirits industry to take them from simply surviving to thriving. So, and that's not all. That's under the foundation, but I know we're over the 20 minutes.
Yeah. Well, you know what? I think that means we're just going to have another episode at some point down the road so we can come back and talk some more about things and share some more of the other great things that you guys are doing down there. So, very, very impressive. And again, your passion speaks volumes for what you're doing and how you're not just creating a business, but creating a legacy, continuing a legacy and building on that, and helping a lot of people at the same time, which is it's fantastic. It really is.
Oh, well, thank you. It is my honor to be able to do it. And I'm grateful of all the industries that I get to help build a legacy. It's this one, because boy, do I love drinking whiskey. So I would not enjoy this in the cotton industry. I'm going to tell you that now.
So, all right, just a couple quick questions and we'll close it out. So you started writing a book. You're researching to write a book. Are you still writing a book? on
Oh,
this?
I am. I actually wrote the first half of it and then
Okay.
had to pause because there are so many major components, not of the time when he was making whiskey or shortly thereafter. That part we've got pretty well sewn up, which is great. We've been able to share that. But there is so much about his birth and his death we still don't know.
I got you. So there's a gap at the beginning and the end that you
And the
still
end.
are
And
working.
there's too much. There are too many variables to close out someone's biography, if you will,
Sure.
without knowing the beginning and the end. And I'm just not comfortable doing it.
That makes sense. I mean, you can't
Yeah.
write the final chapter without having the facts and the
No,
information
you
that
cannot.
that you need. So what's coming up for you guys for Uncle Nearest? What's on the horizon?
Yeah, we'll open up phase 2 and are at the distillery. And phase 2 is our, I don't know, you've been to a lot of distilleries. I'm going to venture to say it's probably the largest distillery visitor center in America. I would venture to say in the world, it's about 30,000 square feet.
Wow.
And it encompasses about 14 and a half of that is the world's longest bar. So when we open it up, we get to have Guinness Book of World Record there because we're beating the current record holder by more than 100 linear feet.
Nice.
We have within the space Barrel House Barbecue. If you've ever been to Lynchburg, you've probably had Barrel House, and they're the best barbecue place out here. And their second location is at Nearest Green Distillery. And then we have a few other things that are a part of it, but that particular space is going to be incredibly special because it's the first time that anyone has tried to bring together the three things that Tennessee is known for: Tennessee whiskey, of course, but also Tennessee walking horses and Tennessee music. And we have elements of that all throughout the distillery. We've been called the Malt Disney World by members of the press. And it was funny because I remember when the Disney folks read that and they reached into me about having our product and throughout Disney, and they said, "We love that they're calling you the Malt Disney World." I said, "So are we." And but that's because there's so many elements that have nothing to do with whiskey, because we want for people to come, whether they're a teetotaler or they are a child. We want them to know the legacy of Nearest Green.
Sure.
And you can't do that if you're just a distillery. So when you pull up at our distillery, people pull up, and I just had this happen last week. They're like, "Okay, so are we at a distillery or a horse farm?" And they go, "You're at both," because we've got about 60 championship horses or the horses that they've sired. They're on the property. So when you pull up, you might actually think you're at a horse farm, and it's absolutely spectacular. It's about 270 acres. So we have a lot of work to be done before we do our preview party on May 29th. And because of the pandemic, we still don't know if we'll be able to invite more than just Nearest's family and the members of the press and the Uncle Nearest team. But we know that we've got a date, and we've got to finish that construction by that date. So that's all we're focused on at the current moment.
That's very nice. So you guys, you're just, and I say you guys, then I just say that. So
Oh, good.
You all.
That doesn't bother me at all.
Okay. I catch myself. I say dude a lot too. I've noticed I do that.
I
I'm
call
too
everyone
old to say
you
dude.
guys. It's perfectly fine.
All right. So now I forgot where I was going with that. No, you're available in all 50 states. Is that right?
We are. I believe we're certainly the first independent spirit
Yeah.
brand, but I
Yeah.
believe we're the first just period. We were in 50 states in less than 2 years.
I saw that today, and I was reading an article, and I saw that, and I thought, wait a second, that's not right. I'm like,
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
We were in 50 states and 12 countries in 2 years.
Wow. That's amazing. So where can everybody find you all in terms of like social media, online, etc.?
Yeah, everything is at Uncle Nearest. So
Okay.
we keep it super simple. And if you're looking for where to get it, if you go to unclenearest.com and you plug in your zip code, we're in, I want to say, close to 25,000 locations at this point. So
Okay.
you'll be really hard pressed to not have a store within, call it a couple miles of
Yeah.
you that'll have it.
Wow. Yeah, that's great.
Call first to make sure they're not.
Make sure they have it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Make sure they have it.
That's right. All right. So Matt, final thoughts on the 1856. What do you think?
Loving it.
Yeah, me
Absolutely.
too.
It's the finish on it was remarkable, and everything leading up to that. The nose was really great. Great color to it. anytime we get to drink some nice mature whiskey is a great night. And this certainly was well deserved of all the accolades it's received.
Yep, I definitely agree with that. And you made the mistake of leaving the bottle in here with me. So as we've been talking, I've popped the top at least twice more and poured a little bit more, just to make sure I was getting a good taste of it. So, but yeah, definitely enjoy it. Very, very good whiskey. So with that said, Fawn, anything else that you'd like to add before we wrap everything up here tonight?
No, I appreciate you all allowing me to come on and share the story. It means a great deal to our team. It means a great deal to Nearest's family, and we're very appreciative.
Well, thank you, Matt. How about you before we wrap it up?
Oh, Fawn, I think the pleasure truly has been all ours here. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us and to share your passion about not just what shows up on the shelves in your bottles, but the story behind it. I'm going through my mind just thinking and looking at pictures of the bottle and looking at the bottle and seeing what's in there is totally not as great as the story that you all shared with us and what you brought to it and the legacy that you're continuing on and everything you're giving back. This really is a great product that has its roots so much deeper than age of the barrels that are in the bottle or anything that's brought forward like that. It's been a great story, and thank you so much for sharing it and for letting everybody know out there the story behind Uncle Nearest.
Well, thank you guys for having me.
Yep. Thank you very much, Fawn. We really appreciate it. And for everybody listening out there, again, this is going to come out on Christmas Day. So if you celebrate Christmas, Merry Christmas. Hope you have a wonderful day. Happy New Year. And Fawn, we really appreciate you spending the evening with us tonight, hanging out, and appreciate the wonderful whiskeys that you all have shared with not just with us, but with everybody in the country and the world. So with that said, I'm going to thank our sponsor, which again, the Stave Restaurant, which is located out in Millville, Kentucky, between Castle and Key and Woodford Reserve, out there in little Millville, Kentucky, on the banks of Glens Creek. Check them out. Just some excellent food. You go out there and you can actually dine in now, which is great. The restrictions have been lifted a little bit, so you can have food there at the restaurant, or you can always order it to go. But check them out. And then also 3 Chord Whiskey. Check those guys out as well online at 3chordbourbon.com, our newest sponsor. We're really happy to have them on board with us. And with that said, I am going to wrap it up, send us home with our tagline, which is, may your glasses always be full, and may you keep on living the bourbon life.
Thank you for joining us for this week's episode of the Bourbon Life Podcast. Our mission at the Bourbon Life is simple: to share our passion for all things bourbon with you every week. And we'd really love to hear your thoughts on how we're doing. You can find us on Instagram and Facebook at The Bourbon Life. You can also contact us by email at thebourbonlife@gmail.com. And you can always find us on your favorite podcast platform. If you have a moment, we'd love it if you would rate us and give us a review. So until next week, we hope your glass is always full and that you keep on living the bourbon life.